All right, let's get into it, shall we? Thank you everybody for joining us today. My name is Scott Horowitz with YouGov, along with Evan Williams, and we are here to present you with our updated COVID-19 consumer monitor, as well as talk about a new economic recovery tracker that we have begun launching this week. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. Please remember you can ask questions throughout the webinar, and we'll make sure we get to those at the end. So just go ahead and type into the chat function any questions that you have, and we'll address as many as we can. And anything that does not get answered today, we will come back to you via email. But we do have a great group of attendees today as the numbers keep growing and people keep trickling in here across several different sectors of the industries that we all kind of work in and live in every day. Everything from advertising and media agencies to travel and tourism boards and utility companies. So very, very exciting to see the large attendance across a variety of folks. Obviously, this COVID-19 pandemic affects everybody, so you're not alone at the end of this. So we'll keep rolling through here. What we'll cover today basically is a quick update on what we have tracked so far, and our goal of all of this obviously was to serve the public good and make sure that we informed as many people as possible of consumer behavior and sentiment around the COVID situation. We'll give you some insights from some of the data that we have collected, as well as touch on any of the future developments that we have planned and are currently rolling out. Our number one priority here at YouGov was obviously to provide as much relevant and timely information to the mass population as possible. That was going to be around policymakers, the government, key stakeholders, media, you name it. And for those that work with us currently, you're obviously aware that we're in the market collecting data every single day. So we really shifted a lot of our focus on gathering information about COVID-19 and asking people about their experiences and what their feelings and thoughts are. And it covers a variety of things that we'll get into today. But our ultimate goal was to use that data, that insight on an ongoing and frequently updated basis to help people understand and know what's going on with the fight of the virus and ultimately serve the public good. And a lot of this information is being used by health organizations, hospital systems, and the like around the world. We have a couple of partnerships that you might have heard about globally, one with the Institute of Global Health and Innovation at Imperial College, which is a fantastic partnership that we have. If you have not dug into any of this information, they are collecting a lot of their own information, merging it with some of our information, and creating some really interesting dashboards that you can get into. The website for these are posted here on the screen right now. We will be making the deck here that we're going through available at the end of the webinar. So we'll email you over this so you don't have to worry about clicking into it now and saving it, but we'll make sure we get everybody this. But basically, we're delivering this data to public health organizations like Imperial College to help governments understand how to stop the spread of this disease and what people are doing and how they're behaving around the world. Our partnerships developed this dashboard for on-demand COVID-related health behavioral insights, as I mentioned, and it is a merge of some of our data, some of the Imperial College data, and this is being used by governments around the world, which is pretty exciting. Ultimately, what we have been studying with Imperial College and what we're trying to cover often is some of the behavioral things related to the COVID-19 situation around the world. So everything from how people are feeling about self-isolation and hand washing and working from home from now on, and this is especially important as the world starts to reopen again, right? So we want to make sure that we're informing the policymakers and the decision makers, either in the local governments, the national governments, the global scene, how people think and feel, and how many people want to go back to work, and if they're following the protocols that have been put in place. And so it's kind of like a three-step approach if you think about what we're doing with our data and how people have been using it to inform their policy. So the first step is obviously we need to get the community knowledge. We need to understand people's attitudes, behaviors, and feelings towards what's been going on. So that's going to be things around awareness of the policies. It's going to be people's feelings of trust and compliance to the government, and all of the things that we have been instructed to do. Are people following it? Will they follow it? And are they going to continue to do these things moving forward? And step two of that is, once we know that information, then the policyholders and the communicators of this information can really understand how to put actionable plans together to help the population. That's ultimately what this information is there to do, is inform the plans, and step three is going to be to deploy these plans. So it all starts with getting really good information, as much information as possible, combining multiple sources of information around the world, developing strategies and plans moving forward to open up the world or see how people are thinking and feeling about what's going on, and then ultimately push people in the behavior that we need and the change that needs to happen. So a lot of the data that we have been collecting for the last several weeks, a couple months now at this point, in different markets around the world, is free on our website. So if you go to yougov.com/free COVID-19 tracker, as you see on the screen right there, you'll find a lot of information that covers a broad range of topics. Everything, as we mentioned before, around kind of support for the government and what they're doing and how they're handling it, and fear information, some compliance data on there, people actually going to follow through and what they're doing, and then obviously the impact it's had on your day-to-day, whether it be your job or your personal finances, things of that nature. So 27 countries worth of data, over 400,000 surveys and counting so far, and we put a good amount of that for free available to everybody. We do know that as YouGov, we do need to serve the public here with this information, so anyone looking for some data on COVID, feel free to check that out on our website, yougov.com/free-COVID-19-tracker. You'll also see, for those that subscribe to Brand Index and or profiles, that we have loaded up a bulk of information within the system already. So for those of you that are using Brand Index, you can add a filter now of level of concern. So you can look at your current customers or considerers of your brand, and depending on what category you're in, this is really important because it's going to be the interaction that people have with your brand moving forward. So if you're a brick and mortar retailer, are people considering coming to your brand now? So really getting a level of kind of concern towards the COVID pandemic is going to be important here. So we've added that to Brand Index. We also added a big bulk of data into profiles. So everything that was free on our website, and then a little bit more as well, is in profiles already, so that you can slice and dice that information by any of your metrics that you're used to working with, or your segments that you're used to working with. So if you're a bank, for example, looking at your current customers and the segments that you track using our data, filter it by their behaviors and thoughts and sentiments towards the pandemic and ultimately the recovery. So if you need help finding those variables or using them, or have any questions about them and you're a current client of YouGov, feel free to reach out to whoever your client service and account management rep is. If you're not a current client, reach out to anybody at YouGov, and we'll be able to point you in the right direction to make sure that we get you the information that is relevant and that is needed to make sure that you can properly do your jobs. In addition to the free stuff that we've got on our website and what we have through Brand Index and profiles, we also have a custom tracker that we have developed and have been running in 8-week blocks. We just started this week our block 2, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But ultimately, our COVID consumer monitor just goes beyond the public data and what's allowed or what's available in profiles and Brand Index, and goes a little bit deeper. We price this extremely competitively, especially compared to other trackers that are out in the market right now. I believe our US tracker is only $5,000 for the 8 weeks, and it's got weekly updates to the data, so you can really keep track of what's going on. If you are a profile subscriber, all of that data can be merged into your profiles data set via Crunch, which is awesome. But we did this to make sure that we were being able to fund the work that we're undertaking for the public health organization. So that's why it's very, very inexpensive, very, very cheap, and goes pretty deep when you look at it compared to what else is out there. But it was there really to help fund the free data that we're giving out to the health organizations and to the government sectors. We do have economic recovery questions added into the new module as an available component as well. So moving forward, we've got our COVID-19 consumer monitor, as well as our economic recovery module, and the ability to add various custom questions into the system as needed, as always. We have refreshed the consumer monitor for the next 8-week period. So that week started now, so starting on Monday. So the last 8-week period is over. If you've had that data, you can continue to use it. But if you need the new data moving forward, just contact us and let us know. And the things that have changed, obviously, around levels of concern. I think in the original tracker that we launched, we were looking at first and foremost level of awareness of the pandemic and COVID-19. I think that's probably not really something that anyone needs to track anymore, since if you don't know about it, I would question where you've been. But the government's handling of the virus, that would be a new one since the last module. Travel plans would be a new one. Changes in spend and media consumption. So where are people getting their information? Changes in content that's consumed. Obviously, if you are a big sports fan, there is no live sports right now. No one's going to the movies, or you're streaming more Netflix. So we're really trying to get a good understanding through our consumer monitor how people are behaving and what they're up to and what they're doing. We've got just more deeper data that has been added, and then there is country-specific tailoring to some of these questions. So obviously, not asking the opinion of the government in China would be an obvious one. However, we're asking about people's perception of the government's handling of this here in the U.S. In our economic recovery module, we're going even a little bit deeper into the things that are important. So confidence and outlook. So views of the global and local economies, and how do you feel your home value is? And, if someone gave you a bunch of money right now, how would you use that? So a lot of economic and outlook metrics are in here, employment metrics. It's an absolute tragedy, the amount of unemployment that's going on right now, and really trying to get a gauge of activity levels at employers as well. Are you busy if you're still employed? Have you had your hours reduced or even increased, right? In certain industries, there's definitely been an increase in output and productivity that has been needed during this time. So we want to make sure we get a really good understanding of that, as well as changing in habits and behavior as far as whether it be, traveling for work or using online shopping. Amazon obviously is pretty busy. Use of cash. I'm a believer that coming out of this pandemic that we will see America, probably in most of the world, move to cashless payments, right? So whether it be tap through your credit cards, things like Venmo, the way that you engage with Uber and Uber Eats cashless. So I believe that might be something that we'll see, and our data will point us in that direction. But there's definitely a lot more as far as what people are expecting to see happen and what's currently happening with the economic monitor that we have launched starting this week. Block 2, again, as I mentioned, started on Monday. It runs for the next 8-week period of time. So all of these are done in 8-week chunks. I believe we'll do another 8 weeks after this one. We might go into block 3, depending on how all of this goes. But we want to make sure we stay relevant and up to date with what's happening in the marketplace. So our surveys go out weekly. The data is available in Crunch about 2 days after the survey closes. That way we make sure we have time to review everything and clean it all up and get it in there for functional use. We have been doing this for the last several weeks. As I mentioned earlier, APAC, we started a little bit earlier, just I think given the sweeping kind of movement of the virus around the world. So the week of February 17th is where we started, but we had the rest of the world up and running on March 9th. So if you think about it here in the US, single timeline, March 9th forward to the 26th of June is kind of our COVID tracking that we're so far doing between block 1 and block 2. But we're definitely open to continuing this if needed beyond block 2 into another 8-week chunk if the market needs that. So right now we'll hand it off to Evan, who's going to spend some time kind of going through the good and the bad, right? Some of the stuff that we're starting to see in our system. Evan will roll you through a few funny nuggets of information, because I think we all could use a laugh every once in a while. And we'll see how the data is looking and what's been going on, Evan.
Good, thanks. So all the stuff Scott just went through about what's in the trackers, I'll run through all of that now, and then if you have questions on it, we can talk about those as well. I'll just start out with this. We did a webinar probably about a month and a half ago at the very beginning of the tracker, and it's early March, and most of the content in that just in that observation was a bit negative, and part of the reason was what we were observing in America at that point in time was really a lack of compliance around personal hygiene and preventative measures. actually, we were seeing people that weren't doing the types of things that were required to stop the spread. So a lot of the information was a bit pessimistic. So I thought it would be fun to start with some just fun facts around the topic that we've collected in recent days. So we have a large panel and we ask them questions every single day about different topics, current events, news, everything. And so these are sort of factoids that we pulled out of that, and we'll just start with those. So let's start with some good news. There are some outcomes from COVID-19 that are actually some good outcomes. One, people are getting closer. We asked people if they feel like they've been getting closer or more distant with their partner, if they had one, since the beginning of the COVID-19 outbreak. And the good news is more people claim that they are getting closer than more distant, which, I know divorce lawyers are also probably pretty busy right now, but in our data, what we see is that, people are getting a little closer than they were before. People are appreciating nature more. I hope the people that have dialed in here have had the opportunity to be outside more than they normally are. When we ask people if they have been appreciating nature more, about a third of people have been saying, yeah, we're appreciating nature more than we have in the past, so we're getting outside. We are supporting local businesses more. 6 out of 10 people, when asked about supporting local businesses for the specific purpose of wanting to support local, said that they are doing so. We're getting behind the people and the small business owners that are probably in the most need right now. Here's one. We asked people if they're gaining weight or losing weight since the beginning of COVID-19, and well, it's up to you whether you think gaining weight is a negative or a positive. Some people think it's negative, but if you're eating the things you like, maybe that makes you happy, and happiness is good, so maybe that's a good thing. But we see that slightly more people are gaining weight than losing weight over this period of time. This is just a random fact. People like jigsaw puzzles. We probably could cross this by age and would figure out that younger people don't, but 6 out of 10 people enjoy jigsaw puzzles, so maybe that's what people will be doing besides just playing video games and watching Netflix. So go out and support your local manufacturer of jigsaw puzzles. Here we go. We're not that desperate quite yet. We ask people sometimes some pretty random questions, but just to keep them engaged in our panels. Sometimes we give them to commercial clients, and other times it's just to keep our panel engaged. How much of it all would you be willing to pay for a video chat with a celebrity? And the good news is we're not that fickle yet. Most people, 3 out of 4, wouldn't pay a dime to have a video chat with a celebrity. The other, whatever it's going to be, 10 or 15%, go for it, spend as much as you want. I don't know if this one's good news, but people are not preparing to die. So we asked people when was the last time they updated or prepared their will, and 96% of people said they haven't updated their will in the last month or haven't previously written one in the past. So good news, we're all kind of going about life and not thinking it's our last days yet. Okay, so here's some sort of, well, not just a picture of the coronavirus, which Scott had said looks like his dog's squishy toy, but some bad and ugly kind of facts that we've collected also before we jump into it. And then we'll see how these things sort of connect to the behavior from our trackers. Well, here's one. We need to do a better job of connecting. So when we ask people if they've reconnected with friends or family members that they've drifted from since coronavirus broke out, 70% said that they have not reconnected with friends or family members that have drifted away during the crisis. So after the call, after the webinar, call someone you love, call your mom, reach out. I think this is something that probably most Americans will have figured out just reading the news, and depending on what you news, you'll have a specific kind of narrative being pushed to you. But nearly 40% of Americans, when asked about how COVID-19 has impacted their view of China, said that it's impacted them in a negative way. And clearly, this is something that the narrative around China is going to get weaponized, especially I would assume as we get closer to election time, and people are looking for issues to win on, and this is the hottest issue of the day. This is something that there's a certain proportion of the American public that feels this way, and it's going to get leveraged. It already kind of has, but probably even more. Yeah, we know the blame game is the norm in the politics, maybe not in our everyday lives, but it certainly is there. And this we would we will see also intensify, and it will intensify, I would say, to some extent against governors, given the perception. So we asked people who they think has the ultimate authority to decide when to lift COVID-19 restrictions, and almost twice as many people say that it's the state governors who have the ultimate decision, versus 30% saying it's the president. So the narrative out there around, well, did things go well? Did things not go well? This will be spun by media. And, when we think about what goes on in the media and how it's sort of, the narratives that come out, a lot of it will piggyback off of consumer sentiment and consumer perception. And people are somewhat informed about who's making the calls on this. We don't know if we're going to shake hands yet. Opinion is mixed on whether we plan to do this in the future. This gets to the psychological impact of social distancing, creating new norms. To some extent, I think, people will go through psychological scarring. They'll have a memory built up of this event. And so 43% said, yeah, we'll shake hands. 31% said, no, I'm not going to. And then there's a quarter of people that just don't know yet. But we're not universally, saying as a total population, or even the majority of people saying, yeah, I'll get back to normal. There's probably new norms here. And I see they got an elbow bump going on with these two guys here, so they're very friendly. Okay, so we'll look at the monitor now, and then we'll look at some of the attitudes and behaviors that people are exhibiting. And this is sort of, for those of you that joined the first webinar, this is sort of a comparison to some extent from where we were, say, 6 weeks ago. And obviously, trends move slowly, but when you look at the starting period and the last period, if it's a long enough time horizon, you can see some pretty interesting nuances. Just a reminder for those of you that don't have the tracker, I won't go into too much of this. We can answer research specifications later, but briefly, we've been running this since mid-March. We run it every single week. We collect roughly 1,000 to 2,000 responses of Americans, nationally representative, on our panel, reflecting the right balances of age and gender and income and all the important factors. And so this goes on every week. And over the time, we've collected, 12,000 responses. This is just longitudinal data looking at people's level of fear. Okay, so the top two boxes here, orange and pinkish, are the people that have claimed that they have fear of contracting the coronavirus, and then the rest of the green are I'm not too worried about it or not at all, and the rest of people don't know, or a very small proportion. Once we started tracking this in week 5, it comes at the bottom. But the key highlight here is that roughly 60% of people still have fear. And as we talk about reopening the country in May, well, it's one thing to make it legal to go do things. It's a whole other thing if people are going to want to do things. And my perspective looking at this data would be that once they reopen things, stuff is still going to be empty. Are you going to go to and sit down in a restaurant? Are you going to be comfortable going to a baseball game and sitting right next to somebody who, God forbid, might cough or sneeze next to you? Probably there's a large proportion of people that are not going to be willing to do that. And we know that. Our data tells us that that's going to be the case. So this will have pretty profound implications. When we talk about restarting the economy, it's not about just giving people permission. Restarting the economy is about changing the mindset of people and creating less fear so that they're willing to do the things that they enjoy to do. And so we see how this manifests. More data on the same topic. More than half of people said that they would be uncomfortable going to sit-down restaurants if they reopened in May. And so again, we may open, but more than half of the people may not even, consider going. And then there's a lot of people that might be on the fence. Talking to some of my friends, and their comments like, they say, I need to get away from the kids. As soon as the restaurants open, I'm going to the bar to drink some beer with my buddies. Well, that's about 1 out of 5 people maybe are out there and wanting to get out, go to the restaurants, and the rest of the people are sort of mixed or very hesitant. Obviously, as you go down this chart at the bottom, that's the largest proportion, the people that would not be comfortable at all. So the narrative around this and how safe it is needs to complement our I suppose, urgency that our government is telling us to get the economy open. This is probably, I'll spend maybe 4 or 5 slides just looking at the view of the US government, because I think it's really important. Obviously, a lot of the media coverage and a lot of the messaging that we're receiving is coming from the government through different media channels, and we could talk about that here as we go along. But I would just say this has not changed. So we are not getting, as an entire country, we're not getting more behind our government or less behind our government as a sort of a universal sort of we all move forward. And this is very different. Other countries have a lot more solidarity within their population on the belief that the government is doing the right thing. And we'll look at how the US compares. But where we are as Americans is, like we're mixed. Some people think it's going very well, and some people think it's going very badly. And guess what? It really hasn't changed over time. And that's pretty scary. Something needs to happen for us to sort of universally agree that our government is moving down the right path. And you can probably guess, and we'll look at it in a minute, why this split occurs. Well, here it is. The sentiment of government handling is distinct between political views. So in our database, we ask these questions, but we also have in our database a number of different cross-sectional parameters that we can look at. We can look at demographic information. If people have told us who they voted for, we have some of that, and we can look at that and understand it better. So when we look at this, we see that people that have claimed that they voted for, or that they're part of, I suppose they are more Republican, or they claim to be Republican. 83% said that that the government is handling it well as of last week. And 28% of people that claim to be Democrats said that the government is handling the situation well. So there's a huge, huge disconnect. And we can look at we can look at this by gender or age or income levels. We don't see this level of disparity on any factor except for your political viewpoints. And of course, independence, as you would expect, right there in the middle. But this is why it's not changing, because to some extent, people's belief on whether the government is doing the right thing is not necessarily based on whether the government is or is not, but a lot of times it's just based on following political party lines. So here we go. This is just kind of a joke, but I was thinking about, do Americans just not agree on anything, and is that the problem? On the right hand side was a question we asked. Again, sometimes we ask questions on different hot topics that we can then cross with any sort of brand data we have. And the question was, in the states that have decided to allow recreational marijuana use, do you think the legislation has been a success? 54% said yes. Do you think that the handling of COVID-19 by the government has been a success? 47% said yes. So we have more people agreeing that we're doing well on marijuana legislation than we are in handling COVID. So it's good to see that we come together on all the right issues. Americans, relative to the rest of the world, have some of the lowest levels of positive sentiment toward the way their government has handled. Again, so our tracker that we run on this, we ask this question. Scott referenced in some markets we do not, because it's not appropriate, but we did ask the same question across this. I think we have probably 15, 16 different countries on this chart, and the US is somewhere along that lower spectrum of sentiment toward the government. You see India very high, Australia very high, et cetera, et cetera. Now, as you look at this, one of the things I was starting to think about was, well, why would this occur? What is it? Well, maybe Vietnam, that's a special sort of situation where people get behind, largely just one party. But the rest of these more democratic societies, why would they be so high and relative to, the US being so low? And well, is it anything related to the outcomes? The actual facts of what has been happening on a per capita basis, how many cases they have had, how many overall cases they have had, and so on and so forth. Now, when we look at this is a little bit of a busy chart, but I'll explain it. On the horizontal axis is the data I just showed you, the percent positive sentiment toward government handling. So you see the US way over here on the left at 47%, and Vietnam way over here on the right at 98%. But then when we start to compare that, or at least look at that relative to the number of cases per capita. Again, like every country is a different population. You can't look at total number of cases. That's not really fair. The US is big, so you'll see more cases. Other countries small, you'll see fewer cases. But when we look at the cases per capita, you can see that there's almost a kind of an interesting inverse relationship between how many cases per capita you have and the general sentiment you have toward the government handling of the situation, right? So we see that India, for the size of India from a population, the total number of cases that have been sort of put out there in the media is relatively low, and so they have a pretty high approval rating. Australia is a dot, and the US is a very, very high number of cases per capita. So it's not surprising that people are saying that they're not happy with the government's handling of the situation. Okay, I'm not going to spend the whole time talking about government because we have other things to go through. So let's look at the protective measures and the policy that's impacting these. And so what we're seeing people are doing and not doing to sort of slow the spread. Okay, so the first week we ran in March, early March or March 12th, you can see is the gray bar on the left. And that's where I was referencing earlier. We didn't have very much positive data. At that point in time, only half of people were avoiding crowded places. 6 out of 10 were improving their personal hygiene, but there's still 4 out of 10 people that aren't even washing their hands more. It was alarming. And so that message was a bit negative at that point in time. We're seeing things improve across the board. People, now we're up to 7 out of 10 people avoiding crowded places. Roughly about the same amount people are now washing their hands, improving their personal hygiene. The mask one I've highlighted a little bit bigger here is interesting because the news of this just came out a couple of weeks ago. And when it came out, all of a sudden the jump of people that have decided to start wearing masks went from 5% in early March. Almost nobody was wearing masks. Now they've taken the advisement of the CDC and now people are doing it, 6 out of 10 and so on and so forth. So obviously on the avoid going to work, some people aren't working. Some people don't have a choice. So that's a little bit lower. We would love to see these numbers be closer to 100%. And we probably all have read stories in the news of the beaches opening up in Florida and people flocking there and they're handing out 8,000 citations on the first day or whatever it was. And we know that not everybody is following all of these rules. And the unfortunate thing about the spread is if people don't follow the rules, we all lose. It's not something that we can debate. And some people can say, well, I'll wash my hands and you can have it, you can think the way you think and you don't have to, or whatever. It doesn't work that way, right? We all need to do it if we want to stop the spread. And as it stands, like, you look at the data on the charts, it doesn't look like the spread, the graph is, smoothed out too much quite yet. Okay, I just highlighted on these things the most important things to look at. I'll talk a little bit about spending. So when it comes to physical store spends, 42% of people said they're spending more on groceries than they have in the past. Groceries is big. Obviously, without dining, and we saw in the first couple of weeks of the tracker that a lot of this had to do with hoarding, but this is sort of sustained. People are continuing to spend more on groceries than they did in the past. A little bit up, but nothing statistically significant there. Toiletries, 21% of people buying more toiletries. Well, I don't think that should have as big of an impact because at a mega category level, nothing has changed that would make you need toiletries more than in the past versus food, where if you can't go dining out anymore, now all those consumption moments have come into your house. And it's just a simple fact that, the share of mouth for groceries has gone to in-home eating, not dining. We still see that there's a bulk of people that are reducing spending or consumption on entertainment overall, and then also clothing overall. Not surprisingly, that's continuing to accelerate as stores are all closed and there's nowhere to shop anyways. Well, I shouldn't say nowhere. There's still places open to shop for clothes, but certainly not clothing only retailers. Online shopping, and we think about, well, are people turning to online instead of, like just slowing down their spending? Well, to some extent, yeah, things are moving online. More groceries, 28%. That's up from, it used to be about 21% of people. But toiletries, people, a little bit more toiletries online, not much. Entertainment, yeah, people probably are replacing going to the movies with watching stuff on Netflix, and whatnot. So that's growing a little bit. And then clothing, it actually, the acceleration of the decline in clothing seems to be growing, if that makes sense. It's kind of wordy, but it used to be only about 16% of people saying they were buying less clothing online. Now 25% are saying they're buying less clothing online. So this is probably related to the pullback in spending overall. And we'll look at that when we look at the economic monitor, what people are doing with their money. Okay, so that's just a little bit of a highlight I went through of the core consumer monitor covering government sentiment, mega category trends, what's going on. I didn't cut all that data because of lack of time by different demographics and psychographics and attitudes and category attitudes. But with the core monitor and the subscription of that, all of that becomes available. You can slice and dice and look at that on a variety of different data points, and we can follow up on that if you want to know exactly what other data points you can cut that data by. But that's just an idea of where things are right now. Generally the summary I'd say on where we are from a sentiment standpoint toward the government is concerning. We're not aligned, and that's going to have implications for everything from how fast we recover to what people are willing to do, and so on. Let's look at some of the economic recovery data. Okay, so this is actually just launching now, but we're testing it out, and we're trying to get the questions right and all those things you typically do as a research supplying agency. So the test periods that we ran were, again, early to mid-April, about 1,000 per week. So we had a sample size of 3,000 to 4,000 people. And then, again, the sample frame, as always, is nationally representative of the US. When we look at the first question we're asking, what are they concerned about? You can see that, well, people are having very different experiences right now. Half of people are saying that they're concerned over just simply paying bills or rent, and the other people are fortunate. They don't have to worry about those things as much, and so not concerned at all in green on paying rent and bills. So 4 or 5 out of 10 people are saying that. But when we start to look at the level of concern, at more macro level indicators, we see that almost universally people are concerned about global recession. They're concerned about local businesses. They don't care as much about the banks. I know we have some people on the call from the banking sector, and I'm sorry guys, they care less about you than the whole globe, but they still care a little bit. Half of people care about the banks failing. Certainly that's a big part of the economy. So we do see that there's very large differences between how people view the macro economy and how they kind of look at their own personal situation. Generally speaking, when we look at people's perspective on how the US economy will look over the next 12 months, we see that it's more negative, more pessimistic than optimistic. Almost twice as many people are saying they think we're going to be in a recession versus growing in the next 12 months. And you might wonder, well, how does that compare to how they feel about things right now, right? Well, if we think about how people are looking right now, well, in the past 1 month, when we asked people, how is your situation going as an individual right now, not many people are claiming that their own economic situation is very good. Only 8% saying it's gotten better. Well, I don't think it's gotten better for most people. And then 3 out of 10 people, 32% of people are saying that it's gotten worse. So many more people saying that things are getting worse than better, but they're optimistic. So when we ask them, how do you think you as a household will be doing in the next 12 months? A lot more people are saying better than they feel right now. It's a little bit mixed if you look at it proportionally, right? So as many people saying better as saying worse, so it's a little bit mixed there and no change. When we look at these numbers, and I don't have it on the page here, but when we look at that better 25%, relative to what we see in the rest of the world, we see that actually in the US, it's higher. People are more optimistic about the next 12 months and the economic situation for themselves in the next 12 months than what has been seen in some of the other markets in Europe and abroad. And that data we take from our global tracker in other markets. People are feeling the effects of the economic downturn. Whether you're unemployed, and obviously unemployment is, you look at like how many people are employed, there's no point of comparison. But it's not just the people that are completely unemployed. When we look at people that have had some change to their employment, hours reduced, maybe they were not feeling well and they were ordered to quarantine and stay at home, furloughed, unpaid leave, retrenched, all those things, they add up to a pretty significant part of the population. Sometimes this doesn't show up in the probably more aggregated measures of employment or unemployment, because a lot of people are still employed, but just not making as much money, and so that affects their income obviously as well. The level of job security and perception of people's job security. In the middle here, people are, their feeling about job security has decreased. We see 3 times as many people saying decreased versus increased job security. Where they're working, for the people that are still working, and we ask, have things changed where you work? Worse, not better, obviously. So we're going to continue to track these things, obviously, for the next 8 weeks at a minimum, and then beyond that as our economic recovery tracker continues to go. But we want to see how these things, how outlook looks on the future, how people are feeling about their jobs as we start to pull out and open up the economy again. So people are cautious. People have less money. People are not so secure about their jobs. They're seeing their businesses slow down. And so it's not surprising that when we look at expenses and the way people are changing their behavior, they're reducing on non-essentials. They're relying more on savings. In some cases, they're taking on more debt. And that's the reality for, let's not say everyone, but, well, the majority of people. 6 out of 10 people are having some form of that experience. We then asked people in our tracker what they would do to give an idea if they were given 1 month paid windfall. And we wanted to see, well, what would they do with it? And largely, people are very conservative. Now, I've grouped these into save it or invest it, 48%, pay off some debt, 29%. Only 11% of people are saying that they actually would spend it. Okay, and from a lifestyle standpoint, we also asked this question sort of around how they spend and their economic situation and what they support and what they don't support. The biggest lifestyle change we've seen right now is that people are supporting local. So about 65% of people claim they're supporting local. That's different than doing volunteer work, not too many people doing that. You can see people, what they're hesitant to do at the bottom. They're not planning to take vacations. They're not going to be traveling as much for work. What's one of the interesting ones here that that we'll continue to look at is I will use cash less in the future. So only 3 out of 10 people are saying that, and we're going to continue to monitor that, sculpt that, try to understand that better. Clearly, you can't use cash if the business doesn't let you use cash, but there are still a lot of people out there that said this is not going to affect the way they use cash. And so sometimes what we think for ourselves, and I use my watch to pay for everything, is not the reality of everyone in the country. Certainly lots of people don't have watches to pay for things, and maybe they don't like using their phone very much, and so cash is going to be what they will rely on when it comes back. Okay, so in summary on this, and then we're going to take some questions here. I know I went through that a bit quick. The main purpose was to give you an idea of some of the things that are going on, some of the themes emerging in how consumers feel towards COVID, towards the government, towards the economy, and towards their own personal financial situation, and their behaviors and attitudes that sort of reflect and sort of manifest from that. The main summary, I don't have a large summary, but it's just one point. People are having very different experiences right now. And as such, their outlook on the future is also mixed. I'm a victim of running in a social circle of people that are like-minded as myself and people that think about the world the same way I do. And sometimes I forget that there's people that are having a situation that is maybe less fortunate. And so I always rely on the data to tell me the truth about what the real experience is in America. And this is going to have very important implications as we start looking forward towards election time period later this year. So a little bit on what's next for YouGov. We've had pretty good support for some of these webinars, and so as we have support, we'll continue to run them. We have some work coming up from the Imperial College of London and public health organizations who are using our data. If you do see this coming across through your LinkedIn or you get invited to it, Sarah Jones is a very interesting person. She's right at the center of this, informing public officials on consumer behavior and how this is affecting and advising them on what measures and what narratives to ethically push out there. She's a very interesting person. I'd encourage you to listen to what she has to say about what's going on. We have our data, our connected data, if you are a subscriber. If you don't know how to sort of look at COVID data in the context of your brands, if within the subscription that you have, call us. We'll help you out. We can help look at that and navigate you through some of the insights and give you some advice on what we're seeing consumers doing at a category or at a brand level or at a competitive level. And then more data, public data is coming. I think one of the things we talk a little bit with Sarah on, she's got specialty on mental health, and this is going to be a thing. Like, people are, it's one thing to get the country back open. It's a whole nother thing to acknowledge that people have been shaped and to some extent scarred by social distancing, and their behaviors moving forward, it might take time to adapt. Maybe it never will. Maybe we'll always have some of these behaviors looming around us. Hopefully, maybe it's taught us to be a little bit more hygienic and whatnot. But some of the other things, shaking hands and hugging, and how you react when someone sneezes next to you, all those things are probably shaped by the situation we've had. Okay, so that's a quick run through of what we have. Why don't we go quickly to a few questions before we wrap up? I think we have about 13 minutes left.
Yep. Yeah, perfect, Evan. Thank you so much. And don't forget to go into the chat in the Zoom webinar chat screen and feel free to type in any questions that you guys have. We'll answer as many as we can right now. And then if we don't get to you on the webinar, we'll make sure we follow up with an email after. But Evan, one question for you, or Will, who's on the phone as well, might be able to answer this one. But will the recovery tracker go into more detail on products purchased, or are we looking at just the category level?
So
I'm not sure if,
yeah, so the tracker doesn't the tracker in itself and the kind of syndicated questions don't go into categories. What we have seen, and part of the purpose is because it's been designed for the public sector to help inform governments, help to inform public organizations that are trying to fight the spread and create policy to stop the spread of coronavirus. Now, what we do related to categories and brands is, and this is very common for the commercial sector, if prospects and clients want something on their categories, what we add in their bespoke questions, and then all of it is integrated and connected where they can look at their brand data, their competitive data relative to all these questions that I ran through. Okay, so that's one. Number two, in our subscriptions with Brand Index and with profiles, you get not just your category, but you get all categories and all brands across all categories that we track, and that's thousands of brands in the US. And it's not a sales pitch that I'm trying to say, I'm just saying that that's where we usually think about integrating more syndicated questions with then very much brand specific and category industry specific parameters that we can look at. So that's sort of how we've been thinking about integrating these different insights, general to specific.
Perfect, thank you. Another question came in about how we asked about the pay and the hours reduction in our kind of test of the recovery module there from April. Are we going to be asking about when people are getting full pay again? At what point that comes back?
Sorry, can you repeat it one more time, Scott? I didn't hear it very well.
Yep, so we asked questions about people being furloughed, if they're having their hours reduced or their pay reduced, basically, right? And the question is, will we be tracking the recovery of that? So asking a question about when people are being back to full-time employment or furloughs are over, so we can start to see the recovery trend taking place.
Well, you can take that, or I can sort of answer that as well. Do you want to talk to that one?
Yeah, go for it, Evan. It's fine. You can do it.
Sure.
Sure.
So, sorry, Evan.
You go ahead.
I can jump in on that. So the short answer to that is yes. We're already tracking changes to people's employment. The answers that we showed on screen here were within that 60% were the negative answers. But what we're looking at and tracking already is people that have had their hours increased. We're also looking at people who have had further changes so we are able to track what is actually coming on the bounce here as well.
Awesome. One more question here. So I think, Evan, this one's probably good for you to answer. Are we seeing any kind of a correlation to stocks companies as our data shows that maybe there's changes in consumer behavior towards a specific sector? Are we seeing any correlation to what's happening in the market around those companies? So I think what we're getting at here is can this data basically be used to predict the future for things like restaurants and retailers?
It's a great question, and it's a question that came up in the first webinar we did as well. So, okay, so let me just say what we do know, or what you can project from this or from our brand index data. You know which brands are I suppose gaining or sort of seeing significant increases in their customer base and their awareness levels and all of those good things. So you see the winners and the losers. The question is, does it relate to stock? My question is, does the stock market relate to performance of companies, generally speaking? And I'm not so sure that always is the case, at least as I look at my own portfolio, as I look at the news on the stock market and whatnot. I'm not even sure if it follows rationally what is going on in the world. Businesses are shut. You look at something like Uber. I know we have some people from Uber on the call, and I worked at Uber for several years, so I can make a comment on this. But certainly, a lot of the use cases for moving around in Uber have disappeared. It's not that the company's, not the company's fault, but that's been a pretty seismic change in their rides business. But like the stock is, it's been okay. So as much as the stock market reflects real behavior, I would say yes, because our metrics look at things like customer penetration, consideration, sentiment. Yes, to some extent, our information follows what people are doing and feeling towards brands and sectors. Does it follow the stock market? I don't know, because I don't know if the stock market always follows consumer behavior. That's my personal view on how these things connect. And I do spend personal time trying to analyze this, not for personal gain, but just because I'm also interested about that question. I have yet to see it be very clear what, the relationship between business performance and the stock market changes. Awesome.
One more question here about the reopening of restaurants and kind of the world, I guess you could call it. Evan, probably over to you as well with this one. And all the data that we're seeing so far, are we seeing anything super specific pointing to people wanting to do two things, right? We said that we know people don't want to travel, or maybe are going to be a little more cautious when they travel for work, so less traveling for work and less vacationing. But do we have anything in the system that points to what they expect that to look like, right? Whether it be blocking out the middle seats on planes and things of that nature. Same type of a theme for the follow-up to that, which is what about restaurants and bars being at 30 to 50% occupancy for social distancing? Are we seeing anything pointing to that being an indicator that people would go out if they knew that the bars and restaurants were going to be at 50%, or they would start traveling if they knew that the airplanes were going to block off middle seats?
Okay, so a couple of things that are going on that question. Number one is we've been putting together a couple of tools that we haven't launched yet, and we're just waiting mainly to commercialize them as demand comes in for those kinds of questions. One piece of kind of new innovation coming out of YouGov is something we call Destination Index. And that is a much deeper dive into travel-related behavior, expectations. It includes, like some of our traditional measures, like if people are hearing good or bad things about airlines, about destinations that they could go to. For example, we've looked at, people's willingness to go to a place like China and whatnot and so forth. So that doesn't get to the specifics that you're talking about. The specifics that this question is about is, various, like what has to happen at a category level for people to sort of start changing their behavior and their attitude. For that, we've developed a number of different sector level modules that have a lot of those kind of questions that are being asked classically. Like if you think about even going to retailers now, I think one of the biggest questions we should be asking, as a retailer, if you are a retailer, is what does my store need to look like related to queuing in the future for people to be coming to my store more? I mean, if we can't have queues out the door into the cold. I'm from Minnesota, and if I can only imagine what it's going to be like for people standing on the frigid cold trying to get into the grocery store. The whole queuing system needs to change, and so we've devised a number of questions that look at like how long are you willing to stay in the queue? It's, something like that. For the travel sector, questions around social distancing specific to airlines and whatever it is. All of those sector related questions are there. We have not started them yet. We're trying to proceed according to market demand and according to people's interest in them, versus building a bunch of stuff and then just trying to push it to the market and monetize on everything during this time. It's we're not trying to be gaining from these types of times in that way. But if you do have questions like that, if you do want to talk about it more, you can get in touch with our local account management team and talk about what you might want to see, and then we just push that out and we collect that information.
Good. And then one last question before we break here, for either Evan or for Will. Will there be another webinar happening closer to the end of this 8-week period showing what we have learned from the economic recovery module so far?
Evan, I'll jump in on that one. The short answer to that one is absolutely. We're looking at an update on this webinar towards the middle of June, when we're getting towards the end of this 8-week block, so we can update you on what we've learned over the time period and can inform you on what is going to happen, as Scott referred to at the top, with our block 3. So how the questions will evolve, what new things we're going to take on board as a result of client feedback, and what the full plan is for taking this into July, August, and beyond.
Perfect. All right. Well, if we didn't get to your questions, we'll make sure to follow up with you directly via email. As we know, there will be a copy of this deck and the webinar available for download. So keep an eye out for an email on that as well, following everything probably later today or tomorrow. And please keep the questions coming. Please visit the website to get your free information that is available. If you are a profile subscriber or brand index subscriber, please make sure you log in to see what's in those systems as well. And if you need deeper information, please by all means let us know so we can make sure to take care of you there. I think that's all we've got for today. So thank you again, everybody, for joining us. If you have any questions, again, please feel free to follow up. We are here to help and make sure that we continue to service our clients, stakeholders, and the community as best we can. Thank you very much for the time, everybody.